Grade 4's next section, geography, different settlements. Now there is a lot of information here. Okay, there isn't a trick to learning it, it's just to get a picture in your mind. So now we're looking at the different settlements, and there are a number of things you need to know about each one. So for instance, we're going to look first of all at a city. And there are 5 things you need to know. 1, you need to know the definition, or you need to be able to explain what it is. You need to be able to say whether it's rural or urban. You need to be able to describe the buildings that you find there, and the kinds of roads that you find, and the types of transport that you see there. So if you can picture the settlement in your head, it will be easier to be able to describe it. So let's have a look. City is the first one, and I want you to think of city centre of Cape Town as a big bustling city. And the definition is it's a settlement that is bigger than a town. It has a wide range of shops and entertainment and services and people. So think of Cape Town, okay, it's quite a big city. Lots of different shops and entertainment things and services, and lots and lots of people walking around in a city. Is it rural or urban? Urban, well remember, rural was open wide spaces, and urban was lots and lots of built up buildings. Now I can see lots of buildings in my picture, so this must be urban. The types of buildings I would see there: houses, offices, maybe some schools, flats, hospitals, churches or places of worship, garages, shops, factories, lots and lots of built up fancy buildings, often high-rise flats and buildings and things like that. Kinds of roads, well, there definitely are tarred roads. Think of if you went into town, you would find tarred roads, you'd find lots of traffic, you'd find lots of lights, you'd find pavements for people to walk up and down on. Just get a picture of town in your head and describe those roads. And then the transport, if you were walking through town, what kinds of transports would you find going past you? Trucks and buses and cars, and some people on bicycles. There would be people walking, lots and lots of taxis up and down. There's a train station in town, there are motorbikes in and out of the cars, there are lots of delivery vans everywhere. So if you have this picture of town in your mind, of Cape Town in your mind, that is a definition of a city, a picture of a city. Okay, and you might have to be able to describe that. Then if we move on to a village, this is a small settlement. It's a group of houses and maybe other buildings, and it's smaller than a town. So if you look at our picture there, smaller than a town, a little village, lots of little houses together. Now we'll see it's got wide open spaces, lots of green in between, so it's in a rural area. The kinds of buildings you might find, maybe some huts, depending on where the village is, small houses, there might be a couple of primary schools around, there might be a few shops and maybe a petrol station because people need petrol for their cars and so on. Gravel, sandy roads, okay, not very busy roads, not a lot of tarred roads. You might find buses going through here. Definitely cars and bicycles, and people would be walking around. There might even be some villages that have horse and cart going from place to place. Okay, much, much smaller, rural, easygoing. When we think of a farm, this is a place with land that people use to grow crops and keep animals. Okay, the farmers, obviously the farmers have to work on their farm, so they have to have large spaces where they can grow their crops, and sometimes they have livestock, animals that they farm, and they don't actually farm with plants. So it's a settlement or a place with land that people use to grow crops. Definitely rural, you can see the wide open spaces. The kinds of buildings, well, you'd find sheds to store all their bits and pieces. You would find the farmhouse, okay, possibly some buildings where their transport would be kept. Maybe they would have some stables if they had livestock to be able to keep them when it's cold. Types of roads, gravel roads, not very built up, not tarred or anything else like that. Types of transport, well, the farmer would need a tractor and he'd need a car and maybe he'd need a bucket because it's not got tarred roads. They might need a little bit of 4x4ing. Different trucks, maybe harvesters. Okay, those are the things that cut down the plants when it's time to harvest them. So farm type machinery, harvesters, cars and buckies and trucks. Moving on to informal settlements. Okay, sometimes called squatter camps. All right, these are settlements with no or poor quality services. So there's no sewage, there's nobody comes to come and sort out the sewage. There isn't always running water. Sometimes there's no electricity. There aren't great hospitals or schools or libraries. Okay, people have built their houses out of what they scrap metals and scrap materials that they can find. And some do have electricity, but a lot of them don't. They have to work with candles and gas power, okay, gas sources of heat. Rural or urban, In both, actually. In some urban areas, you'll find informal settlements, and you'll find them in rural areas. Basically, wherever there's some land and people need to stay, they'll go and build their own home, and that would be automatically an informal settlement. The types of buildings: shacks, sheds, huts. Sometimes you'd find shops, informal dwellings. These are the kinds of things that are built by hand with scrap materials that they can find. Roads, definitely uneven. They're footpaths, it's gravel, it's sandy. There's no tarred roads in between the shacks and people's houses. Transport, people would be on bicycles, they'd walk, there'd be taxis, and there'd be cars. Okay, you won't find a massive big bus going through here. Often the houses are built very, very close together, so there wouldn't really be space for big buses to drive through this kind of settlement. Then we are looking at suburbs. Now think of Edgemead. Okay, that's an example of a suburb. It's a residential area on the edge of a city or a large town. Residential means there are residents, which basically means people living in homes. Okay, it's where we live, not where we work. In urban areas, definitely you would find suburbs. The types of buildings, you're looking at homes, you're looking at blocks of flats. Sometimes there's a hospital, sometimes they're places of worship, sometimes there's schools and shops and garages and things like that. Just think of Edgemead, think of the types of buildings you would find here. The kinds of roads, well, they're tarred. We've got pavements, we've got drainage areas, there are traffic signs, there are traffic lights all over, that kind of thing. Very smart, clean roads. Transport, well, you find cars, buses, taxis, people walking, sometimes taking bicycles. You'd find people on motorbikes, all those kinds of forms of transport going through Edgemead. Then the last one, we've got a town. And this is bigger than a village, but it's smaller than a city. So it goes city is the biggest, then a town, then a village. In an urban area, you'd find houses and schools and garages and places of worship. The roads would be tarred, and you'd find cars and people walking and bicycles and buses and buckies and things like that. Okay, it's not quite as busy as city centre, as Cape Town, the city, but it's quite a busy little section of a place. So you would have a town, and on the outskirts of the town, you would maybe have your suburbs. Okay, so if you want to think of Edgemead, if you want to think of possibly N1 City, that sort of area where there's lots of shops there. There's N1 City, and there's the value center, and there's all those car selling places. That could almost be like a town. Okay, that would be the center, and all the shops would be there, and then your residential area, your suburbs would be around that, just to give you a little bit of a picture in your mind. Remember, city is the biggest, then you get a town, and then a village is even smaller. Okay, kinds of questions your teacher could ask you. Well, she could show you a picture and ask you to identify the settlement. And you've got to remember what you've learned about each one. She might say to you, is an informal settlement in a rural environment or an urban environment, or whichever settlement she's talking about. She might ask you to explain what a suburb or a town or an informal settlement, etc. is. She could say, compare a suburb to a village, and you would have to compare them in terms of if it's rural or urban, what kinds of buildings you would find there, the types of roads and the types of transport you would find, and so on. So you might have to compare some of them, you might have to identify them, and you'd be able to have to get a picture in your mind and describe each one of them. So I want you to remember the six different settlements: a city, a village, a farm, an informal settlement, suburbs, and town. And for each one of them, can you give a definition of each one? Can you say whether it's rural or urban? Can you explain the kinds of buildings you would find there? Could you explain the types of roads you would find there? And can you tell me what kind of transport you would find going past you? Okay, if you can get all those things in your head, you should be fine. Good luck.